Well, thank you so much, Wendy. So let me get started. A lot of people ask me, what is this thing with create? Why are you talking about creating a successful Agile project? And the answer is, I see a lot of people start with Scrum or some kind of iteration-based approach, right? You work in 2, 3, or 4 week time boxes, and iterations work really, really well when you have a cross-functional team with all the capabilities and skills you need. You're co-located or very close to co-located, so you can manage all the meetings and get people together, and you work on one project at a time. Every single client I have worked with in the past, I think 5 or 6 years since I started to teach my Agile and Lean project class, has not been able to fulfill these three bullets. They don't have a cross functional team with all the capabilities they need. They have to get people in and out of their team. They are not co located, and they don't work on one project at a time. Or if they do, they have an unknown amount of production support on other kinds of interruptions. So, my suspicion is that you and your project and your team, your contexts are also unique. You might not have the same experience that I have. And my question for you is why not select something that manages your uniqueness? Now, I am not saying you cannot use Scrum. I'm saying you might have to use Scrum with something else in addition so that you can actually see what everybody is doing. Let's see. Wendy and I did this. Yes. Okay. It's always exciting when I get the webinar to work the way I want it to. So a lot of times people don't realize there there is an umbrella of agile approaches, and to be honest, they all come under the umbrella of lean approaches to knowledge work. A lot of people remember lean as a manufacturing tool, right, where you look for the waste and you optimize the flow. And that's the optimize the flow is what we want, and we look for waste in different ways for knowledge work. So I am not talking about Lean Six Sigma. We do not want all of the variation out of our projects. In fact, we might want to capitalize on our variation. But you can see in this big circle I have that there are various lean approaches to knowledge work. XP is a really good example. So it's primarily technical practices guided by values. Scrum says we're not going to talk about the technical practices, but we are going to use a project management framework with time boxes. DSDM is all about a time boxed approach to delivering functionality based on facilitated workshops. So if you have access to your customers, you might actually want to think about those kinds of workshops. Crystal is all about the kind of product and the number of people on the team so that you're really thinking about the context of what you're doing. Feature driven development is building value for the customer feature by feature by feature, and FTD has been around for years and years and years. I think it started in the late 90s. Kanban is all about visualizing the flow, working by value, and managing the WIP, the work in progress. I'm going to talk about WIP, work in progress, several times throughout this webinar. So if you think of WIP, work in progress, you might need to write that down. Make sure that you follow along with me. If you're ever confused, send something in the chat and we can figure it out. Okay. So those are agile approaches. And if you are not aware that there are more agile approaches than just whatever framework you're using, you might want to do a little bit of research to understand what the various pros and cons of all these agile approaches are. My question, which I think is the most important question when we think about organizing a project, how do we organize our project so we can deliver value often and keep doing that again and again and again? So notice that I'm agnostic when it comes to the approach. In fact, I often use time boxes and XP uh, technical practices, or I use flow and a cadence and the technical practices, and I like to add in facilitated workshops. Right, so I'm kind of an all over the map agilist. You don't have to be that way, but I would like you to think about what would make sense for you, for your organization and your project right now. So, when I think back to why we started with Agile Approaches, I don't know how many of you remember the bad old days of process. I've been working for a very long time, and we had the process wars back in the 80s and the 90s. And so everyone thought that if we had a standardized process, we would be able to release something that we knew would work. And I was a manager and a director and a VP at that time inside organizations, and I often said to my managers, "We'll know what we release when we cut the disc, or when we make the tape, or when we have the build." We had trouble understanding precisely what we would deliver, and if we wanted to release something sooner, we had to we had to work by feature set. Um, we wanted to adapt to changing market and customer needs. And our adaptation needs are even more important now than they were back then. We want to develop a little predictability. What can we deliver and when? We want to work closely with with the customer. How can we actually deliver what the customer wants? And for you folks inside of, if you're IT and you have internal customers, you can work closely with the people down the hall. They're probably not literally down the hall. That's a little bit of a problem. Now, the interesting thing is, notice I have in this last bullet, change your culture to be more transparent. When your culture is more transparent, people understand what they can believe from you, what they can expect from you, all that good stuff. So, transparency might be a little scary, and it's also really much better than this black box of a project where nobody knows what's going to happen. So there are two kinds of approaches to Agile. And the first is iteration based Agile, which, if you're doing Scrum, you absolutely know about. Notice that the time boxes, and I'm hoping you can see my pointer here. Uh, Wendy, maybe you can tell me if people cannot. Each of these boxes in the image is exactly the same size. And you do all of requirements analysis, design, test, release, and deploy inside the time box. And the time box itself limits the work in progress. It also creates a regular cadence. So, time box iteration based agile is a really good idea. You get a cadence every week, every 2 week, every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks. I have a problem with an agile approach where time boxes are longer than 4 weeks. I actually don't like it longer than 2 weeks, but that's me. And you can see we know what we can deliver on a regular basis. Now, time box and iteration based approach to Agile means you have to get to done inside of every time box. You finish what you start. Otherwise, you have